A record number of new COVID infections, nearly 130,000 across the UK. But as the booster rollout continues, there are early signs Omicron is leading to fewer hospitalisations.
We do watch very carefully all of the data, and we have had some good news that it does seem to be a bit milder in terms of severity.
Meanwhile, France records one of the highest daily infection rates in the world since the start of the pandemic, 180,000 cases. Also tonight, protests outside court as the Kremlin bans one of Russia's oldest and best-known human rights organisations. How poverty is forcing children in Afghanistan out of school and into work.
As quickly as possible. Oh, there we go!
And questions and recriminations after England lose the Ashes to Australia in a crushing defeat. Good evening. The government says it will keep under very close review its decision not to bring in further coronavirus restrictions in England as infections rise to a level not seen before in the pandemic. There are restrictions on socialising in the rest of the UK. The early indications are that the Omicron variant is not leading to the same level of hospitalisations as previous waves, but ministers say they're watching the data and will act if there's a large increase in the coming weeks. And there's concern about the impact on hospitals of the number of staff having to self-isolate. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson has the latest.
A vaccination centre in Lambeth in London, among the boroughs worst affected by Omicron in the UK. Staff here say there's no shortage of demand for jabs.
I'm a school teacher, I've got to go back, there are zero mitigations in class, and I don't want to get sick, I'm 57 years old, so I'm quite frightened of that, and I don't want to pass it on to my loved ones.
It's very important because I'm a recently retired senior head of education at University College, so I preach it to my staff, so I have to jolly well do it as well.
Unlike the rest of the UK, which has increased restrictions, the government in England is relying on vaccinations to get the country through the latest wave of COVID.
We do watch very carefully all of the data, and we have had some good news that it does seem to be a bit milder in terms of severity. But we do watch the hospitalisations and we do watch the number of people in hospitals all the time.
The data the government in England are monitoring in particular are for hospitalisations, which are increasing but are still far from the peaks of previous waves. And in London, which has been worst hit by Omicron, the number of patients in ICU beds at hospitals like this and others are still well below worrying thresholds. Despite the latest figures showing record high infections in the UK relating to the Christmas period, some scientists say the spread of the virus in England seems to be slowing.
Cases are still rising. I think suggestions a few days ago that we might have actually peaked, I think was probably not borne out yesterday. But on the other hand, cases aren't increasing as rapidly as they were a week or so ago. I think we can be fairly certain that they're not doubling every couple of days now.
But the virus in Wales is now growing exponentially, mirroring what happened over the last few weeks in England.
Our rates were quite stable around the 500 per 100,000 mark until a week or 10 days ago. It's now heading towards the 1,000 per 100,000 mark. These data that we published today is just before Christmas. So we still have to watch and see what the Christmas mixing and the New Year mixing is going to produce.
Back in England, the decision not to add further restrictions has been described as a lifeline for pubs, bars and clubs by the hospitality sector. It also says allowing people to go out on New Year's Eve signals better times ahead.
It's not just about New Year's Eve for us. I mean, it's bigger than that. It's the start of a recovery. And we believe that we've created safe environments for people to come out and socialise. And we think it's the best scenario, given the fact that if we'd have closed, we potentially have seen more house parties and more illegal events, which would have been counterproductive.
But there are concerns about the wider impact of Omicron on the NHS. Hospital leaders say while many people are coming into hospital with COVID, but not because of COVID, staff are also getting infected.
It's very clear that as soon as you get Omicron circulating significantly amongst the community, of course it will be circulating amongst NHS staff. We are now having to redeploy staff to fill the gaps that are being left in critical and essential services by staff who are off with COVID-related absences.
Along with vaccinations, the government in England is urging people to remain cautious and, if possible, to celebrate outside on New Year's Eve. It will assess whether more restrictions are needed in January. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
Well, let's look at the latest government data now, and some of the figures are still being affected by delays over the holiday period, and some data has not yet been published. There were 129,471 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, meaning on average there were over 114,000 cases reported per day in the last week. 18 deaths were recorded, that's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test, and 84 COVID-related deaths were recorded on average every day in the past week. On vaccinations, just over 400,000 boosters were administered on average every day in the past week, bringing the total to more than 32.5 million. Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake is in Westminster tonight. So, Jonathan, all the UK nations say they're watching and responding to the same data, yet they're coming to different conclusions.
Yes, Fiona, and not for the first time during the pandemic. There is a clear contrast between the approach of the government here at Westminster for England and the devolved administrations around the UK. And there does seem to be a cautious confidence in Downing Street that they'll be able to hold off imposing similar measures that are now in place in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ministers say, though, at every turn they're keeping a close eye on the data and won't hesitate to act if need be. But for now, the focus is very much on the booster jab programme to keep the Omicron variant at bay. The true test of that strategy, though, won't come until we know the severity of it for sure and see how many people it puts in hospital and, in turn, how the NHS can cope. If it can't and Boris Johnson decides further measures are necessary, well then a true test of his political authority will also come, because there'll be Conservative MPs lining up in big numbers to oppose and vote against any move of that nature. So the Prime Minister will be hoping that day doesn't come. He'll also be hoping that his advice to go out and celebrate, albeit cautiously, this New Year's Eve won't come back to haunt him. One other thing to watch: the availability of lateral flow tests, now a key part of the government's message to take one before you go out and socialise. It's been patchy in places. Sources in Whitehall accept that there is a hugely increased demand, but officials seem confident that the supply is there to cope with that.
Jonathan Blake at Westminster, thank you. COVID rates are rising in many countries across the world. France has just recorded a record high of 180,000 cases in a 24-hour period. That's one of the highest rates worldwide since the start of the pandemic. Yesterday, the government introduced further restrictions to try to bring infections down. Meanwhile, US health officials have halved the recommended isolation time for people with asymptomatic COVID from 10 to 5 days amid a surge in cases there. Our North America correspondent Aline Makboul is in Washington for us this evening. And Aline, this is an attempt to try and solve staff shortages as much as anything, but it's not gone down well with everybody.
No, it hasn't, and it's not just about those who test positive, but that's where the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, started. They said for those who test positive now, after 5 days, they can end their isolation. That's as long as on that 5th day they don't exhibit any symptoms, or if their fever's gone and the other symptoms seem to be resolving themselves. But what they've also said is that for those Americans who are vaccinated and have had the booster but think they've been exposed to someone who has tested positive for COVID, they don't have to isolate at all, as long as they're careful, they wear masks, and they do get tested around the 5-day stage after they feel they've been exposed. And this is, of course, in recognition of the fact that while there has been this huge surge in cases, it is of a variant that may be more infectious, but seems to be leading to milder symptoms. And those in the healthcare sector were saying, well, we can't have all these staff of isolating, but also other sectors, including the airline industry, say, well, if you are expecting this huge surge, as we believe will happen in the next 3 or 4 weeks, then we have to find a way to function as a society. But there have been their critics, as you say, those who say that by reducing these isolation and quarantine times, you're going to lead to a greater spread of this virus. And there are those who are critical of the government by saying, well, it's all very well saying you should live your life more freely, but the government is not providing the tools to do that in the form of at-home testing. At no stage during this pandemic has the Biden administration sent free tests to people's homes, lateral flow tests. They do say now, they have said in the last week, they will start to do that, but only from January.
Ali Makboul in Washington, thank you. The Supreme Court in Russia has banned one of the country's best-known and oldest human rights organisations, Memorial, accusing it of violating a law requiring groups to register as foreign agents. It comes at the end of a year in which the Kremlin has cracked down vigorously on its critics. Our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg reports.
More and more, it feels as if Russia is turning the clock back. Liquidate, the judge says, as she orders one of Russia's oldest civil rights groups, International Memorial, to shut down. The NGO was found to have broken Russia's draconian foreign agents law. Disgraceful decision, the reaction from the gallery.
It's 100% political thing. And the substance of this political decision is just one more step from authoritarian regime to totalitarian.
For more than 30 years, Memorial has been shining a light on one of the darkest chapters of Russian history, what became known as the Great Terror. It's been painstakingly cataloguing the victims of Joseph Stalin's mass repressions. Up to 20 million Soviet citizens are believed to have been sent to the Gulag, to Stalin's prison camps. Hundreds of thousands were executed. Memorial was set up to keep their memory alive. The founding of Memorial in the late 1980s was a symbol of the Soviet Union opening up and facing up to its past, to the crimes of Joseph Stalin. The shutting down of Memorial is a symbol too of how in Russia today the past is being reshaped, rewritten, and how civil society is under attack. Hurrah! Vladimir Putin has been using history to try to foster patriotism. So he focuses on the glories of Russia's past, like the victory in World War II. Through this annual reading of names of the victims of political repression, Memorial has tried to remind Russians of their tragic past. Now, though, it's being silenced. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
At least 50 firefighters are dealing with the blaze in the Belfast Harbour Estate area of Belfast this evening. Thick black smoke has been billowing from the site on the East Twin Road since lunchtime. The fire service says it's a protracted incident with crews likely to remain on site through to the early hours of the morning. People living nearby are being asked to keep their windows shut and motorists are being advised to avoid the area. Police searching for a missing 12-year-old girl are asking for the public's help to locate her father, as he may be able to help with their inquiries. Leona Peach was last seen in the Heel Park area of Newton Abbot at 9:15 in the morning on the 20th of December. Officers believe she may have travelled to Bideford to be with her dad, Billy Peach. Utility company bosses have suggested ways the government could stop household heating and electricity bills rising by big amounts this winter as the wholesale price of gas continues to spike. Representatives of the energy industry met ministers yesterday. So let's talk now to our business correspondent, Simon Browning. So Simon, there's a few projections today about quite how much these prices could go up. How bad are things likely to get?
Well, Fiona, energy costs have been called an enormous crisis as we approach 2022. That's according to the boss of one of the big energy companies here in the UK, OVO Energy. Now, some analysts have predicted that bills could be rising by half or more, and that could last not just into next year, but into 2023, when the energy price cap is reviewed again next autumn. Now, just on the energy price cap, that's obviously the cap that we use to pay for individual units of gas and electric. the more you use, the more you pay. Now, the energy price cap is due to be reviewed next month in February by Ofgem, and that's where we're expecting to see those big changes in energy costs and price rises. But why is it happening? Well, energy prices are soaring and gas prices are soaring right across Europe because demand has rebounded so much after COVID lockdowns and economies are just rocketing again.
Now, a lot of people are going to be worried about how this is going to affect their household bills. What are the energy companies proposing as solutions?
Well, we know that yesterday the energy industry met ministers from government and advisors to talk about what can be done to save consumers' bills. And that was joined by the trade body Energy UK. Now, the boss of the trade body Energy UK, Emma Pinchbeck, detailed some of the proposals that they asked government for yesterday. That included potentially cutting or reducing VAT, which would act as a little bit of a cashback on consumers' bills. And also the big one, which was to ask government and the Treasury to stump up billions of pounds to, in effect, pay for those big shocks in prices now. That would then mean that bills would increase gradually over time whilst we paid back that big loan. Now, the government wouldn't comment on some of those proposals today, but has said that throughout the meeting there was discussion on the issues and that the meetings will continue to make sure that UK customers are protected. But the problem is that during these long festive days, everybody at home, the thermostat on, the fairy lights, the TV, we know that this is going to be the big economic reality of 2022.
Simon, thank you. As the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan deepens this winter, many families are having to take drastic action to survive. Hundreds of thousands of children already had to work in the country. Now even more families are taking their kids out of school and sending them onto the streets, often earning only enough to buy a little bread. Secunda Kamani and camera journalist Malik Mudassir report from Kabul.
Wherever you go in this city, you see children working, wafting incense into cars, picking through rubbish.
My dad lost his job. No one else at home was working, so I started shoe shining.
Even when billions were pouring into this country, many children had to help provide for their families. Now, amidst an economic collapse, the number is growing.
Now there are a lot more children. Now people are hungry.
It's 8 a.m. and 13-year-old Pervez is getting ready for work. He and his young cousins only started polishing shoes in the last few months.
I earn 50 Afghani a day, or 70 to 100. In the past I earned around 150. When my dad stopped working, then I stopped going to school to earn some money. The price for a sack of flour is 3,000 Afghani. A container of cooking oil is 3,500. Everything has become expensive.
Pervez's father spends his day waiting for work as a labourer on the corner of the road. In the past, he earned just enough to get by.
I come here every day, but don't even earn 10 Afghani. I can't even afford a piece of bread for lunch. It's the same for everyone here.
I don't feel good that my child is working, but the situation is bad. We have no choice but to send him to work.
Pervez and his cousins walk the streets, sticking together in case other boys start fights with them. Business is slow.
I get so sad it hurts my gut when people don't let us shine their shoes. Then we don't even earn enough to buy 2 or 3 pieces of bread. Sometimes we go home empty-handed if we didn't get any work all day.
With no customers, the boys take a break at a playground in the centre of Kabul. They still have big dreams for the future. What do you want to do when you're older?
Engineer.
Doctor.
Doctor. Pilot. Engineer.
When school starts again, will you go back to school or will you just carry on working only?
If my dad finds work, we will go. If he doesn't...
The boys walk past the city's kebab vendors and the displays on Kabul's Flower Street, as well as civil servants demanding unpaid salaries and huge queues outside banks. International funding was cut off after the Taliban takeover, Afghanistan's foreign reserves frozen and sanctions imposed. Now the economy is in free fall. Have you had lunch today?
No.
Why?
We didn't find any work.
So what will you do now?
Nothing. We will stay hungry until the evening, until we earn some money and can take some bread home.
Eventually they buy a single piece of bread to share between them. Soon after, they find a customer too.
Even though I had my shoes shined in the morning, I let them do it just to help them.
Have you ever seen it this bad in Afghanistan, economically?
From morning to evening, most of those coming to my shop just want to shine shoes or are begging. Maybe 150 people like that come here every day.
The money Pervez earns will help feed his family today. But food prices are rising and the rent is overdue. Are you happy that you're helping your family?
Yes, I'm happy. But we should be in school. The good thing about school is that it can help us become something.
Sikander Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
Let's take a brief look at some of today's other news. The mummified body of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh has been unwrapped digitally for the first time in more than 3,000 years. The mummy of Amenhotep I, who ruled from 1525 to 1504 BC, was found 140 years ago, but archaeologists have not opened it to preserve the face mask and bandages. Scans have now revealed previously unknown information about the pharaoh and the jewellery buried with him. China says its new space station has twice narrowly avoided collisions with satellites operated by the American entrepreneur Elon Musk. The complaints were lodged with the UN Space Agency, though the incidents have not yet been independently verified. At least 20 people have died in severe flooding in northeastern Brazil. Heavy rain in the state of Bahia has forced 60,000 people to leave their homes and 2 dams to give way. The state's governor has described it as the worst disaster in its history. Teenagers whose parents smoke are 4 times more likely to take up smoking, according to new research. In a government campaign, doctors urge parents and other caregivers to kick the habit. Tim Muffet has more.
Our children are watching what we do much more than they're listening to what we say. So if we say to them, don't smoke cigarettes, and we're smoking ourselves, our behaviour is going to have a much greater impact.
A new film from the NHS aimed at parents who smoke.
Why do children seem to take up the behaviour of the adults around them?
Despite a huge drop in smoking over the past 50 years, around 1 in 8 adults in the UK still smoke, according to the Office for National Statistics. And new research shows that teenagers whose parents or caregivers smoke are 4 times as likely to take it up.
Smoking as a habit is something that can be passed down through families. So the additional motivation to quit for parents will be knowing that if they do that, they can substantially reduce the risk of their own children taking up smoking.
This campaign is targeting conventional smoking rather than vaping. Electronic cigarettes are widely seen as a safer alternative, although most do contain nicotine, which is addictive. The pandemic has also affected smoking habits. There have been higher rates of quitting, but also higher rates of relapse and signs of an increase in smoking among younger people.
That bad language, that bad food that you're probably eating, not being motivated enough to do exercise, smoking, all of those behaviours are little bits that your children are picking up.
Campaigners also stress that giving up smoking is one New Year's resolution that also benefits others. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
Cricket now, and Australia have thrashed England to retain the Ashes at Melbourne. The visitors were all bowled out for only 68 runs in just over 80 minutes, the lowest total in Australia since March 1904. Joe Wilson was watching through his fingers.
What was it on the faces of the Australian players in Melbourne? Delight, of course, but surprise too? Surely even they didn't expect everything this quickly, this easily.
Oh, he's got him. There's the comeback from Mitchell.
England's latest collapse was a new low. Ben Stokes first man out. Well, the bowling was too good, and Australia have a limitless supply of it. Scott Boland got rid of Joe Root for 28. Now, Boland was selected specifically for this match. He took 6 wickets for 7 runs in England's second innings. Any sense of resistance vanished. 4 noughts in the 68 all-out.
Oh, there we go.
The final wicket was taken by Cameron Green, 22 years old. A decade of Ashes cricket ahead of him. Who's next for England? Their best players have been a distant second in this series. And no long-term issues will be solved in the next few days, but there are 2 more test matches.
You have to have a really strong inner belief to be able to come back, and we need to put some pride back into the badge, and we need to give people back home something to celebrate.
Well, Joe Root can rely on himself to score runs, but really no one else, and that's unsustainable.
I don't think with our system we're producing quality test batsmen. There's a big emphasis, as well documented, about one-day cricket, 100 cricket, T20, 50 over. We won the 50 over World Cup in 2019, which was brilliant. But our county cricket, which is the breeding ground for our test players, is marginalised.
Perhaps Australia might actually long for England to improve. When it's such a one-sided series, even winning could get boring. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
There's more throughout the evening on the BBC News channel. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.
The run